everyone, and welcome to The Trek. The Trek is a Civics Unplugged series where community members participate in meaningful discussions on topics that are too often neglected when thinking about building the future. Through prompting questions and provocations, we venture together into complex but important conversations related to building the future and democracy. We understand that this work requires ongoing dialogue, but it's a journey worth trekking through. My name is Madison, and I'm a high school senior from Verdigris, Oklahoma, joined by some of our amazing community members and a special guest, which you will hear from all of them in just a moment. And tonight we're talking about the future of leadership. So we're starting off with a word association. And when you see your name on the screen, do a brief introduction and say your 1 to 3 words.
I'd be happy to start. Hi, my name is Chabu Kapumba. I am 19 years old and a first year at the University of Toronto, and I'm also based in Toronto, and a proud builder of this community. And when I think of the future of leadership, the word that comes to mind is small. I think, and the reason why I chose the word small is because I just came from my guide training, and I think that leadership is always seen as like such a big thing, and that only happens in like really high executive positions, and that there's leadership opportunities and moments that are important in really small spaces too.
Cool. Hey everyone, my name is Ashley. I am 17 from Vancouver, Washington. When I think about the future of leadership, think about agape love. And I think like that comes to mind just because I feel like so much of leadership is about like getting things done and like getting people towards like the shared destination. But along the way, like it's so important to, you know, like be taking care, like to genuinely care about the people you're working with. And I think like that's, I don't know, I think that's becoming a lot more present for me in the spaces that I'm in.
My name's Max. I am a high school sophomore. I'm 16 years old. I'm from Portland, Maine. And my word association for leadership would be community, because I don't think it should ever just be focused on leadership, because ultimately you are, at least in my mind, you're taking care of a group of people. So it's not, I feel like focusing just on one person will lead to consequences, bad or less favorable consequences.
Hello, my name is Phoebe. I'm a high school senior from the Washington, D.C. area. And when I think about the future of leadership, the word that comes to mind is compromise. Especially as I enter more of my own leadership experiences this year, I used to think that leadership was just about telling people what to do and getting things done, just sort of getting free reign to do whatever you want. And that's actually, in fact, the complete opposite of what it is. You were always thinking about other people, the best interest in not only yourself, but for the people that you're leading, and having to work together with other leaders.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm 15 years old. I'm a sophomore from Alexandria, Virginia. And my word association with leadership is example, because I think that sometimes leadership gets associated with a title, and when it could be more about how you're setting an example for others, even if you're not in a position of formal authority.
Cool. I guess that's me, is it? All right, so I think, well, it's Julian Chapman. I'm the president of Forsting Company in Toronto, Canada, and what we do is we work with leaders to develop leaders and to develop leaders who are increasingly more capable. And I suppose the word that I would use is servant. And we can certainly unpack that later, but servant and caring for others is critical. So I'd say servant would be a good word association for leadership right now.
I'll put gardener, because I think we really underestimate the importance of cultivating the environment where other leaders can kind of blossom out of. And just like how all these different variables contribute to different people's ability to like succeed.
Yeah, and for mine, I would say unify, grace, and opposite. Unify because I think going into the future of leadership, especially when we think about work and politics, the ultimate objective of leaders should be to unify people, regardless of their background or parts of their identity. Grace because I think that a lot of times leadership positions are seen as like positions of authority, but there's a lot of grace that is missing there, especially like in the way people speak and treat people that they work with. And then also opposite, because I think a lot of times we have the opposite view of leaders that we should, especially the way that it's portrayed in high school with certain leadership positions. But yeah, so now we can get into the actual conversation. Does anyone have a question or provocation they want to pose?
My question would be, what is a leader's job? I feel like everybody has a different opinion on this. So I'm just curious to see what other people think.
That's a great question, Max, because leader is a word that everybody uses, but it means different things to different people. And getting to a common definition so that we can have a common dialogue, I think is really important. There's some classic definitions around leadership. You know, getting people to do what they wouldn't normally do is probably a simple definition of leadership. But that also belies how we see it in other ways and in other means. So, and the future of leadership, I think, is all of the things that everybody talked about. But it is about how do you move people forward and get to somewhere. You know, in hindsight, I would have said that my word association, there are three words that tie in. I guess I should have read the question better, but servant, authentic, and transformational are the essence of leadership in my mind. Because you have to transform what you're doing. You have to be authentic and true to yourself, but not let your ego get out of control, to Madison's point around grace, right? So to be authentic is not to allow your ego to overcome. And then the servant aspect is that you have to be a better follower before you can be a leader. So it's all of those various elements. But that's just what business talks about and what various other organizations talk about. But I'd be interested to see what others see it as.
I think that's such a cool definition. And when I think of like leaders and what their role is, I think that they are meant to be like human provocations, like they provoke the best in the people that they're supporting and quote unquote leading. And so good leadership, and I think that's the importance about like being a provocation, is that like provoking the best in people doesn't automatically assume provoking the best for the company, project, organization, or like being a focus. And so good leadership also means selecting the right people or helping people understand whether or not like this is the space where they would be, you know, in the best situation to thrive. So yeah, I think a leader's job is to serve as a good provocation. But then again, it's also a really easy role where you can serve as like a bad provocation and bring out the worst in people and like the worst dynamics. So that's kind of the word or definition that comes to mind for me.
It's interesting that people use the term to include things like being a leader in your sport or being a leader here or a leader there. And I think, Chabu, what you've done is you've reinforced that it's about me with other people or the leader with other people. not being out in front of other people necessarily, although I guess the definition that I gave you is about being out in front, but in other words, not being above necessarily. And that goes back again, I guess, to your point, Madison, about grace. It's not about being above people, but about being out in front.
I think in addition to what's been said, something big that comes to mind is bringing people together and bringing them to a place where they can work together like in an efficient way, kind of like a unifying figure. I want to say it was either Hobbes or Locke who said that people will inherently fight, like they just can't they can't live in harmony. And to some extent I think that's true, but I think with the right person we can all be unified. And I think that's not the only part of a leader's job, but it is one of the big ones.
Yeah, and I think with this question, I think that you all have done a very good job of defining what a leader's job is, but it kind of makes me want to talk about what a leader's job is not, which I think Julian had a really good take on. It's not about, I guess, like making it about yourself and like seeking power and putting yourself on kind of like an authority level. And it makes me wonder, I put opposite as one of my word associations because I just feel like that is so true. From what I've seen. So it makes me wonder, like, how do we get to a place where many leadership positions, the leaders end up doing the opposite of what they're supposed to be doing? Like, look at politics. And Max said leadership is about bringing people together, but politics is what is tearing us apart. So I would wonder, how did we get here?
I think leadership can be very self-serving, and that's what it's not supposed to be. I think at the end of the day, being a leader is about putting other people above yourself and making sure that other people have the tools that they need to succeed, and you want to facilitate a kind of environment where everyone can succeed. And just setting the tone in general, that goes along with being, the role model, the example, but in a way that, sort of executive leaders of organizations or countries just sort of set the tone for overall company policy and just serving as the face of something. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with that. And I feel like we don't talk about that enough, other than just the power and the glory.
Well, Max, you did a good provocation by bringing Hobbes into it, and what we find certainly in corporate leadership is the nature of everyone is trying to be in control. Human beings need to be in control of their environment, and that's that's why we struggle with the things that we struggle with, and so in the nature, I think to Madison's point, how did things go so wrong? It's people trying to control other people, and it is that desire to control. We do need that in order to feel whole, and we see that particularly right now during the pandemic is that people are struggling because they're not in control of their environment, and so the nature of leadership is to be able to balance that need for personal control with the greater good, and in a lot of cases it's just about personal control. It's just about being the top dog, so to speak.
You brought up something interesting. Well, control, I think, brought up like the mention of compromise, which Phoebe mentioned. And my first instinct when you mentioned everyone needs to be as in control is that, okay, well, if that's human nature, then it will inherently be really difficult for a leader to try to lean away from that, which brings any leader to a period of compromise where they have to potentially sacrifice some of their own desires for whatever goal they have in mind. And ultimately, I think it's a balance, between like compromise and your own opinions. And it seems that right now we might be leaning a bit too close to the control side of things.
So to answer this question, how do we get to a place where many leaders are doing the opposite of the role / just a better place, better like state of leadership? I think we need to keep talking about it. I think this is a great conversation. This is already, but like even like in the specifics of it as well, like to Julian's point about there's so much desire for we've an innate desire to control things. I think we should talk about that. I think more people should talk about that, and ask like related questions like, is the outcome that I have somehow been fixated on controlling toward, does it make sense? Especially if it's like creating tons of like division and just issues. It's like it's creating a lot of, creating any sort of set of issues with people that I ultimately want to have a good relationship with over the long term. I don't know. I don't really remember talking that much about leadership in high school or even college, really. I think it just felt so like tactical. How do you land an internship? I don't know if other people have had a different experience in high school.
I think that like such a big component of leadership is in the decision making. Like you're kind of tasked with making the big choices that are hopefully reflective of like end goals and like the collective that you're leading. But decision making has also become synonymous with being very dismissive. And so I had a really great conversation earlier this week, and we were just talking, and I realized that like almost all authority that exists is borrowed. Like people lend it to you, and then you're either replaced by someone else, or that authority is revoked once you've like once people don't feel that way anymore. So if all authority is borrowed, and then you're very dismissive of like the perspectives that are being offered, it creates like really shaky ground, and the dynamic is really flawed. So I think that we got to a place where leaders are doing the opposite of their role, in the sense that like they've mistaken decision making for being really dismissive of like other perspectives, or abusing that authority to say yes and no to things. And it also feels like something that transcends a lot of boundaries, whether it's like political, in relationships, in workspaces. I feel like that's a thing that's like constantly prevailing, but also hard to call out because leaders are supposed to make the decisions.
Yeah, and this is making me wonder. I think we've like established a good definition and like how we've gotten here, and it makes me wonder like, because Gary, you talk about how you didn't have conversations about leadership in high school. I know that I did, but I think that they were all the wrong conversations. Like there's student organizations like SUCO, like student council especially, they just portrayed this completely like wrong view of leadership. Like basically the consensus was you had to be a super outgoing person who could, I don't know, like in high school it's like someone who was like funny and outgoing, can meet a lot of people, just things like that. Like, and there was just like one certain type. And I think that leadership was also treated as something that's like very exclusive, and that you had to like obviously fit that certain type. So it makes me wonder, how can we stress this like new definition of leadership going forward, and how do we train leaders to embody this?
It's great. It's a great question. And if I could answer that, then I'd be making a lot more money than I am right now. But it's a great question, Madison. And if I can come back to Chabu's point about decision making and authority, authority is a form of control, and the danger of decision making is I let the genie out of the bottle. And so for leaders to be truly effective, they have to have clarity of mission. clarity of context, why they're doing something. And I'm leaning back on my military background, but the mission has to come first. And so I can be a leader in the not-for-profit sector because I've got a strong mission. Whether it's climate change or anything like that, that becomes the mission, and I become the leader. But it has to be a core reason, and not just self. It has to transcend oneself. And in the military's learned a long time ago that you have to actually listen to the soldier that's on the ground in the position before you go and make the decision, because they have the best picture. And so militaries around the world have empowered their soldiers, the lowest level in the organization, to provide their input and their insight, because they're there. And leaders can't see everything. They can't see the entire battlefield, so to speak. So it's an interesting dynamic, but it does come down to there has to be that clarity of mission. And the problem with training leaders is that there are too many bad examples out there. There are too many bad examples, and they become popular, and social media is not helping, as we've seen in the last month, right? Social media has made things a lot worse, and our desire for control is also our desire to tear down things rather than build things up. So anyway, I'm now prattling on, so I'd love to hear more thoughts from you guys.
Madison, what you said about ASP culture really resonated. I feel like definitely in school, like I feel like the typical leader is just like the really outgoing kid, like super involved in just all the clubs. And like I feel like a lot of people like self-select out of leadership. And I think I think part of like training leaders to embody this definition is really just helping every kid see that they have the ability to lead in their schools and communities, and they're probably already doing that. Like there are so many ways to lead, and it doesn't necessarily need to be like you're on the student council, right? Like you can lead in your classroom, you could like lead by like organizing a study group. I don't know, but like I think we just need to widen kind of the definition of what leadership is, because every kid can be a leader.
That's a really good point. And I think that also like one of the ways that we can encourage people to like realize that anyone can be a leader is by having like conversations like where people respect each other's ideas, where no idea is just automatically bad. And I think that goes back to like, emphasizing respect over the need to control, because then when people think that, oh yeah, my ideas can be heard and listened to and respected, then they can also become a leader by moving forward with those ideas if it happens like that, or if they want to like believe in their mission enough, like you're saying.
I love what Ashley said about like the different types of leaders that are out there. And for me, I think that examples are so important because they almost like give you a foot in the door in terms of like how you might want to like change your thinking or approach. And so when I'm seeking out examples, I look towards like people who I have like really intimate relationships with, instead of like sourcing them from like really public spheres. Like there may be one or two examples that are like, popularized people. But I can definitely say that like one of the most meaningful moments of leadership I've had was when someone recommended me a book, and I read this book and it literally like blew my mind in 100 different ways. And like for me, that was an act of leadership. There was no like, you should do X, Y, and Z. They're just like, oh, like I really loved this. It resonated with me. It might resonate with you. That was an act of leadership for me. And then when it comes to defining my own variation of like what I would look for myself in terms of leadership, like someone who is able to like help you source out like really good moments for yourself. Like that's an act of leadership. So I think that when it comes to like embodying a definition of leadership and seeking that out, it's good to like look in the spaces that you know people really well in already, so that you can see what it looks like in a much smaller scale, and then maybe apply that thinking to something much bigger.
I think the high school definition of leadership is very much focused on gatekeeping and just sort of like completely echoing what Madison and Ashley said about like having a certain stereotype of kid and like this is what a leader is supposed to look like. And if you're not exactly like this, then you can't be a leader. And that was very much how I felt, especially with regards to student government and student advocacy, because I did not fit the typical SGA kid stereotype at my school. So I thought that leadership wasn't for me. And I could not have been more wrong. But like the entire way that we teach leadership, or we teach kids, oh, you need to get a leadership position in this club if you want to get into college. And the whole concept of people taking on leadership positions just to have it as a title on a resume, that just really irks me, because, you know, the whole point of leadership is just sort of, you know, again, trying to help other people and not yourself. And I go back to thinking about like specifically, you know, we tell people with leadership, either you have it or you don't. Like some people are natural leaders. And while that is definitely true, working on your own leadership skills and your journey as a leader is constant work. Like the natural ability to, you know, step up and having, you know, a lot of self-efficacy is very important, but passion and dedication and making space for other people is, I think, what ultimately makes a good leader.
Two thoughts that come to mind, Phoebe. One is the fallacy of the great man model, and besides from it being gender specific, but it makes people think that there are some traits that transcend all aspects, and leaders come in many different forms, and there is no, you don't have to be a charismatic, flamboyant, out there in front, standing on top of the mountain sort of leader. You can be very quiet and laid back, and I think that's a big mistake that you know that we make in our society, and you know, and I think you know, some of the things that come to mind here is the role of coaching. So in the business world, they often see leadership and coaching to be synonymous with one another, you know, getting the best out of people. In fact, coaching is about improving people's performance by removing the interferences in their potential. And that's a critical leadership trait. And but it's just that ability, to make those connections with human beings, to make the connection here in the heart, as opposed to necessarily in the head, and to connect with people on those levels. These are great discussions.
So to kind of add on to what everyone's saying, you know, going back to my word association with the gardener, it's so important that like when you're trying to develop leaders, that the gardeners themselves are exemplars of the type of leadership that they, you know, are trying to have the people in the garden kind of, or the plants. I don't want to keep using this metaphor right now, but like the trainees need people to tangibly look at, that aren't just like strangers on Twitter, that they can put their best like face forward in a tweet or like a nice TikTok, right? But that's not the same thing as actually seeing them apply those principles and to and to a degree of success. I think there's a lot of people preaching, like, you know, writing blog posts about leadership, but to see it in action and to actually, you know, support the development and flourishing of the people that the leader is supporting, that's when you like, I guess that's what I hope most people that are trying to study leadership, that's how they're getting their leadership kind of inspiration. So it's not just like one-off, like, oh, this sounds good. I read this in a book, or I, saw like a viral tweet. That's an irresponsible way, I think, to model your own leadership.
Gary, I like what you said about having, the people that are trying to, develop leaders model the kind of leader that they want people to develop into. But I think there's a very fine line between that and, being a role model versus idolizing people. Because I think a lot of the problem with idolizing leadership is that in a democratic system, it prevents people from holding them accountable, which will cause them to be more self-serving and not think about the collective that they lead. And the other thing I wanted to say about this, I think that in general, I very much agree with the sentiment that you have to be a follower before you can become a leader, especially within the political sphere. Most of the leaders do not resemble or have daily lives that are like the people that they lead. And I think that if you have more people who are actually more affected and impacted by political decisions and laws, that might be a better way for leaders to start embodying a more like community-based definition than self-serving if they actually come from the communities that depend on leadership decisions.
So here's the practical point that I was trying to make, just to clarify. You don't know how Biden leads. You see him in press conferences. You don't know anything about how he leads. You don't know how Trump acted. Well, there's a bunch of like exposés inside the White House about how Trump acted towards his staff, right? But my point is that you want to have as direct experience with someone that you're trying to model yourself after or take inspiration from, so that it's not like you're not just like filling in the blanks of what you think that the impact of their leadership style is, right?
Something that I would like to add, and this would occur on a smaller scale, one in which the people being led have more active window, have clear windows into the actions that their leaders are taking. But I think criticism should play a really big role in any person's leadership. That criticism is more likely to be constructive in my mind, like if the followers are closer to the leader. But we all make mistakes, and when people don't tell you what you're doing wrong, what they'd like you to change, what could make their experience more enjoyable, the mistakes will continue to be made. And it's just the power of speaking up can help everybody, which might be something more doable in smaller leadership positions than something, say, president or senator. Just because of physical connections.
That makes me want to pose a provocation of flaws in leadership, because at the end of the day, leadership roles are embodied by people, and people are inherently flawed. And so how can you like take that into account in a way that's like not ignorant of that truth? And if possible, how do you like embrace that reality? I think that's a really cool conversation we could have.
If I can just build on what you said, we often say that the second biggest epidemic at the time, and I guess now it's whatever, third or fourth, is the nature of perfectionism. And it's a very dangerous path, perfectionism. And there are far too many leaders in roles that are trying to be perfectionists. And it's the sure route to unhappiness, because you can never get there. You can never control the environment enough to get things perfect. Things will always go wrong. So it's a very difficult aspect.
Yeah, I would also say that distinguishing intention from virtue signaling is also very difficult. I know, like, it's very easy. Like, I can think of like a lot of people in leadership positions where it looks like they're doing good, and I literally can just not tell if their intentions are pure or not. And I really struggle with that as well. So yeah.
Interesting.
I think Gary mentioned this in the chat though, about how like perfectionism means that like you're distancing yourself from mistakes. And mistakes are or should be synonymous with like learned lessons. So you're almost like cutting yourself from opportunities to do better and learn more. Because like mistakes are so they're the only actual thing that's definitely 100% going to happen. And so like avoiding them or distancing yourself from them really prevents you from like learning how to engage with something in a way that is like achieves the intention or achieves added value.
I think the follower also plays a really important role in mistakes, and perfectionism. I think we might have like created this I don't know, this false expectation for everything for leaders to do to be perfect, as if they are, you know, for some reason more intellectually capable than the average person. I think we need to remember that even though we may have chosen this person with experience, who, you know, is able to emphasize with their followers, who you know, who we think is so great, even though we may have chosen this person, they are still human. And to some extent, understand, well, to a very large extent, understanding that they will make mistakes and that is just a part of the human experience, and especially the leader's experience, could be really helpful. But at the same time, I guess not ceasing criticism, because criticism is always helpful.
Yeah, I think humanizing the role of leader is really important, and also kind of going off of mistakes and accepting mistakes from leaders, or at least respecting them even if they make mistakes, is I think as a society we look at what things that people did like 10 plus years ago and still hold them accountable for it. Like they definitely are, but you can also acknowledge that between those 10 years they have changed a lot, just naturally, because people tend to change with time and by learning mistakes. So I think that especially with leaders, you can look and see if there's a repeating pattern over those 10 years, or if it was just a mistake that they actually learned from, if there's proof of that, and just accepting that they're not the same person they were 10 plus years ago.
I have a paradox for you, and it's the nature of democracy and leadership. Because if democracy is representation of the populace, then there's really no room for the leader to be out on their own. In fact, we need our democratic representatives to represent us and not necessarily to pull us in a particular direction. And I think that that's actually the tension. It's certainly the tension in Canada, and I think it's probably the tension in the U.S. is that we've lost sight of that representation in this drive for the leader that represents things. But it is a real paradox, and it goes back to the great leader model, and everyone looking for that leader, when what we actually need, what democracy actually needs, is representatives who represent their people and represent the needs of their people. So just a thought.
That's really interesting to me, because when I think about like political campaigns, everyone kind of has to like present their stance on issues, when like that should be so irrelevant to the entire equation. Like I don't care what you think about X, Y, and Z. Like I need to understand who is best at interpreting our collective view of what we need. Like that is just that's the definition of just like how we've evolved from like representation to leadership.
Wow. That's profound. Like,
Yeah.
like, wow, like it's almost just become like a tradition that everyone has to take like a hard stance on every issue that you can imagine. Wow. So how would you answer, like, like if someone asked you a question about an issue, like, and you're trying to be as representative as possible to your like constituents, how would you answer that?
I think that a cool way to approach that like question would be, this is where I'm going to source out perspectives, or this is how I'm going to go about sourcing out perspectives. Because again, it should be about the people and not really like your ability to attain the perspectives of the people you're representing should be the skill set that we're seeking out. Or even just like your ability to correct your own mistakes so that you can reprioritize representing people should be the skills that we're seeking out.
Process. So being the kind of champion and like facilitator of process, democratic processes, not ironically, like the traditions are asking for authoritarian ideologues that are like, pick your soft T totalitarian view of, well, everyone should subscribe to my view on XYZ issue, versus like, let's bring everyone into this democratic process so we can sort this out for the maximum benefit.
All right, any final thoughts on this question before we move on to reflection? Cool. I'm going to go ahead and send the link to the notes in the chat so that you all can look over them. And we can move on to reflection. I can go ahead and get started with mine while everyone is thinking about their reflection. Just connecting so many great things that have been said. It's really making me appreciate, especially the way that we do the application process for CU. It's way different than most leadership programs that I know I have applied to. It's not heavily based on your resume. It's a lot based on like just asking questions about like why you want to get involved. I think that that's so important because it means we're not contributing to so many of the toxic stereotypes that we've talked about. Just because like resume based like leadership recruitment obviously already exists in so many spaces, and a point that Gary brought up, like we don't really know the leadership styles of so many people, like especially politicians. Like you blew my mind, Gary, when you said like we don't know how Biden leads, like like that. And I think that concept carries over for like resume based leadership stuff, and then also to connect with Julian said, I think the identifying leaders should be about identifying people's mission, because like everyone has a mission, like they're doing everything that they're doing for a reason. And so identifying leaders is about identifying the ones who have missions that are not self-serving, and I guess would best serve whatever collective they're contributing to.
Well said. It's really empowering to be asked what your mission is, because it implies that your mission, like what you think matters.
Right.
I said also add on to that though, I feel like you don't learn about a leader from their perspectives or their resume or even like their mission, which is very much like end goal, where do you want to end up? I think you learn about someone from their processes and from what they're doing like day in and day out. And I feel like a lot of times the stated mission is very much not aligned to what people's actual actions are.
Yeah, I think that it's less about like a stated mission and more like identifying their authentic mission, because ultimately the processes that they do every day is guided by whatever their authentic mission is. You see what I'm saying? So yeah, I think that obviously people could say missions that are very different from their intentions. So maybe it's like, I guess it comes down to like intentions and what intentions and for what purpose do you have those intentions? Like, what is your ultimate goal?
That's also really interesting because, like, good intentions doesn't equate to good leadership either. Like, there's such like a complexity to being a good leader, is like having a real authentic, like, good mission, and also the practical application of it. Like, those are two different things, and it's hard. And I think it goes back to what Max was saying like way earlier about a community and how it really is, it's not just one person doing all the leadership, but it really is a group effort, even if there's one person who seems to stand out the most.
At the start of this call, I definitely like knew that the way that I liked to approach leadership was like not like the classic route. Like for me, leadership was very much like I wanted it to be saturated on the mission or like the long-term end goals and kind of helping like projecting that future and almost like staying away from day-to-day operational things because I feel like it would distract from that. But I think now, I think that it's really important that like leadership is about molding that vision like collectively with people alongside you. Like it should feel like a never-ending brainstorming / jam session with like people on like how to achieve said mission. And like if intentions aren't informing the process, like if it's not like a very clear direct line, then I think that that's a really easy way to like have people alongside you who are able to kind of like witness how there's disconnect. And that's really cool.
Yeah, on the note of process, this conversation made me realize that there are processes such as the trek and other dialogue series we have, other group processes that we have, that a lot of people that have positions of authority or whatever would avoid implementing in their organizations because it would surface so much like interpersonal, like toxic, like unaddressed issues. So yeah, I mean, I guess this has made me realize that if there's actual buy-in by the like organization or a community as a whole into certain processes, that says a lot about the leadership of that work.
I think before this call, especially as a leader, I always want everything I do to be perfect, and I always want everything to be done exactly the way I want it to be done. And I like to keep things very organized and very particular, and I have a very like rigid style of doing things. And I think in this call, just talking about leadership is really making me reflect on maybe just letting go on some of that and just making sure that I am a more humanized leader and I'm doing the best to maybe not just stick to what's best for me or particular preferences, but just to focus on the mission and the end goal of why I'm really here as a leader.
That was really cool, Phoebe. And before coming into this call, I was thinking about the various aspects of leadership that I've dealt with, and when I asked the question about the paradox, it's actually as a result of this call, and just how the future of leadership, particularly in civics or in governance, has to be about listening and not about party politics and leader politics, but actually listening to the future of democracy is actually listening to the people. And it's almost an anathema to have leadership in democracy. It's and of course we've all strayed off that. But thank you. I hadn't taken all this into account before, or thought about it from that standpoint. But it is about listening. It is about listening to the people and then enacting what the people need and what the people want, rather than what I want or in, you know, in particular. So really cool.
Totally agree.
I think something big that I've taken away and reminded myself of is that leadership is an ongoing process. You know, it can start whenever, but once you start, it's a skill that is practiced and improved upon, and it never really stops. I think the other big thing is always remembering the mission, and even having a very clear set mission. It could really help me, at least as a leader, improve.
Julian and Phoebe, since this was your first trek, what were your thoughts on like the format and just overall?
I guess I had done a lot of study circles before, and I think that this is sort of like study circles, but better because it sort of allows us to take the conversation where we want it, and we're not just here to, you know, check off some boxes and then be done. And it's more about thinking about your experiences and your life after the trek. It doesn't just stop when the call ends. So I really liked it, and I would love to do more.
Yeah, it's a great format. This is a great format. This is where you do listen, and you know, you don't pontificate, and you don't, you know, the points that you guys raised are huge, and you know, I would suggest to you that the things that you raised, the corporate world isn't even touching. They're not even spending the time to think about it. So keep thinking about it, keep questioning, keep challenging, because when you get out into the working world, they expect you to just do. It's the tyranny of do. Don't think about it, just go and do it. So so well done, everyone. That's amazing. And if you invite me back, I'd love to come back. But
Yeah, of course.
Yes,
Of course.
of course. We have these literally all the time. So just message Gary when you want to join one. But I really enjoyed this conversation. I think that this is so important, and it just makes the work that we're doing at CU feel even more relevant and important. So very grateful for all of you and for the amazing conversation. And I hope that you all have a great rest of your night. Hope to see you again, Julian. And I will talk to you later. Bye.
All right, bye.
Thank you all.
thanks so much.